Chiron in astrology is the wound that you carry that never fully closes. It's not clean or tidy. It leaks into identity, relationships, the body, and the voice. It's inherited and also invisible. A kind of mythic ache that lives in the background until life presses directly on it. Named after the wounded healer in Greek mythology, Chiron shows where we hurt and where we hold the power to help others through similar pain. It's not about fixing, it's about understanding, feeling it fully, being with the pain until it reveals something useful. Most people don't like looking at their Chiron placement. It can feel like a weak spot, like something that you should have outgrown by now. But Chiron is more than just the pain itself. It's the story that we tell ourselves about the pain. The beliefs that calcified around the pain. And in your chart, wherever Chiron sits, by sign, by house, and aspect, this is where the most tender, transformative work awaits for you. Now, the sun in astrology is your core. It is your light, your I am. It's your vitality, your identity. It's how you express yourself and where you shine, where you want to be seen. In many ways, the sun is your inner flame, how you understand yourself and the qualities that you grow into as you mature. The sun is the part of you that wants to live, not just survive, but really live. So when you have an opposition in your chart, it means that two planets are facing off in a 180-degree division. It's a tension, a back and forth, a mirror. Oppositions can feel like a constant tug of war, but they're also an invitation to integrate two very different parts of yourself, kind of like a tennis game going back and forth, back and forth. The key is really learning to listen to both sides without letting either one dominate. In this case, it's your sense of identity versus your deepest wound. And that's not small. So if you have your natal sun opposite to Chiron, the wound is really personal. It hits the ego. It might feel like there's something wrong with me, or if people really knew me, they wouldn't love me. So it creates this really big split between who you are and how safe it feels to be seen. Often there's a sensitivity around recognition or self-worth or creative expression. You might crave visibility and fear it at the same time. So this placement can show up as a lifelong search for approval, a fear that your gifts don't matter. Maybe you were shamed for shining too brightly or made to feel selfish for having needs. There's often an early experience where being yourself came with pain. The sun says, I am, but Chiron whispers, not like that. So you might become hyper aware of other people's reactions, reading the room like a survival skill, adjusting your light to avoid judgment or rejection, overachieving to prove that you're worthy, or underachieving because what's the point? Why try if it's just gonna hurt? The opposition, it creates extremes until you learn how to hold both sides with compassion. At the heart of this aspect is a question. Can I be myself even when I've been hurt for it? And that's not an easy yes, but it's the work. Sun opposite Chiron people are often drawn to healing professions, art, or activism. Places where they can transform pain into purpose, where their story becomes medicine. The challenge is real. This aspect can bring periods of depression, especially around identity or failure, or feeling fundamentally flawed. Rejection hits harder. Success can feel hollow. There's often a push-pull between wanting to be seen and wanting to hide. Sometimes the ego takes over and tries to outrun the wound. Other times, the wound swallows the ego whole. Neither extreme is really sustainable. So to work with this energy, you have to reparent the parts of you that got hurt for just existing. You learn to separate your identity from your injury. You stop trying to prove that you're okay, and you start believing that you're okay, even when it still hurts. And that's the deep psychological lesson. Your pain doesn't define you, but how you meet it does. And healing doesn't mean erasing the past. It just means living truthfully in spite of it. So having this placement in your chart, it's a lot like waking up every morning with a bruise on your soul and then calling it breakfast. That's the sunrise for your sun opposite Chiron. Your core self is stretching towards the light, only to trip over an old wound that begs for attention. You learn that vulnerability isn't the bug in the system, but a twisted feature. Each time you flinch at praise or shrink from the spotlight, you're holding a mirror to the parts of you that you've convinced yourself are unworthy. So the lesson here is brutally simple. You can't glorify your gifts until you sat with your scars. So some days you'll find yourself splashing outward, confident and, desperate to mask the ache under your skin. And those are the days that you learn humility by tripping over your own grandiosity, like announcing your strengths to a room that's already seen your trembling hands. It's in the echo of your bravado that you really discover authenticity, letting others see you crack open, raw and unfiltered. That becomes the heart's true mic drop. Instead of running from the pain, you become its kindest ally, recognizing that every scar carries a story worth honoring. Eventually, sunlight and wound, they stop being enemies and they start a messy dance. You realize that teaching others about healing means wearing your broken parts with a curious pride, not a shamed whisper. So your greatest breakthrough isn't a flawless glow, but the quiet surrender to being perpetually beautifully human, faults and all. And in that surrender, you learn that the deeper cut, the more potent your gift of compassion when you share your story with the world. So when we are thinking about this placement, we might want to think about Robin Hood as the medieval poster child for the sun opposite Chiron, really. Here is this noble-born outlaw whose identity, i.e. the sun, is forever split by the wound, Chiron, of the exile and injustice. He's stripped of the title and land, his self-worth bleeding out beside the king's coffer. So he takes to the forest. And that tension, the proud noble turned outlaw, mirrors the internal tug of war between the sun opposite Chiron. The self that wants to shine with confidence is constantly reminded of its deepest bruise. So in Robin's case, the bruise is the loss of home and the sting of corrupt authority, which becomes the very fuel for his rebel spirit. Every arrow that Robin loses is a message. My pain is not a prison. It's Chiron's arrow wound turned inside out, teaching that what injures you can also become your greatest tool. Robin's missions of redistributing wealth aren't just acts of thievery. They're actually Chironic in nature. They're these healing rituals, turning grievance against the powerful into balm for the oppressed. So, sun opposite Chiron folks, they learn the same alchemy by leaning into their shame and offering their scars as a bridge to others. So they transform personal suffering into collective courage. And yeah, Robin Hood, he wears his broken parts like a patched tunic. Ragged, but, recognizable. He never hides that he's an outlaw with a cause. Just as though those with the sun opposite Chiron must eventually own both their brilliance and their wound. So, when Robin stands in Sherwood Forest, arrow drawn at the tax collector, he's showing us that, the true sunlit glory isn't about flawless victory. It's about stepping into the clearing, wound on display, and declaring, I may bleed, but I will still fight. And just like Robin Hood's life splits between noble birth and outlaw exile, the sun opposite Chiron sets up this cosmic tug of war between where you're meant to shine and where you carry the old. So, in chart terms, the sun stakes its claim on one sign and one house, your core identity, your purpose, your ego, and Chiron lurks exactly 180 degrees away in the opposite sign and house, pointing to the arena of deepest wounding and the hidden medicine that you actually bring the collective. So that polarity means that every time you step into your sun's spotlight, you might feel Chiron's ancient bruise flaring up, asking, who am I to claim this glory when parts of me still bleed? But it also means that your true healing and your greatest gifts to others lies in weaving these two opposites together, learning where you need to claim ownership of your story and where you need to offer compassion to the wounded self across the chart. Now let's look at some case studies. Luigi Maggioni was born on May 6, 1998, and he entered the collective spotlight not just for his actions, but for the symbolism laced within them. His natal sun in Taurus, opposite Chiron in Scorpio, reveals a classic struggle between the desire for grounded, stable self-worth and the resources, and an unrelenting wound involving power and the darker side of control, which is Chiron in Scorpio. This isn't just, personal pain. It's systematic. It's the kind of wound that you inherit through a culture, through a class structure, through watching people suffer at the hands of powerful institutions. In traditional astrology, Scorpio rules insurance and death, and all that's hidden or taboo, or the resources that we get from other people. So Chiron in Scorpio becomes a wound around those systems, around money connected to loss and institutions that profit from pain. Scorpio is crisis, where we meet crisis and where we unfortunately have to battle crisis in our lives. So with the sun in Taurus opposite Chiron in Scorpio, this is going to be through the process of crisis situations. So the alleged killing of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson becomes this symbolic act of not just violence, but of confrontation, a message, an open call to all CEOs. Maggioni's words and actions indicate a sense of mission, something aimed at Pluto itself, the ruler of Scorpio, destroyer, transformer, avenger. His behavior becomes a part of a mythic drama between the powerless and the powerful, the patient and the profiteer, the wounded and the seemingly untouchable. So the sun opposite Chiron often becomes a lightning rod for unresolved cultural pain. Some write books, some become therapists, some create art or revolutions, and in extreme cases, the wound eclipses the self entirely and becomes a weapon. Whether Maggioni saw himself as a martyr or a soldier or a warning signal, the astrology really suggests a life that is driven by the need to reconceal that inner war. I want to feel safe versus I cannot unsee these systems that harm. Luigi can be seen as this modern day Robin Hood, stealing from the rich, or at least holding them accountable in a world where justice is often sold to the highest bidder. His sun in Taurus craves fairness and stability, the right to live simply without being crushed by greed. But Chiron in Scorpio, it doesn't let him rest. It rips the blindfold off. It forces him to confront how power hoards resources and hides behind corporate walls. So the Sun-Chiron opposition makes a person carry both the wound and the torch. It asks, will you become the healer or the weapon? And in Luigi's case, the line between the two blurred. But whether you see him as a criminal, a whistleblower, or a warning shot, the chart, it speaks quite clearly. This is the ache of someone born into a system that taught him to suffer quietly, and he refused. Healing this aspect means finding another way to break this cycle. It means reclaiming Taurus values not through destruction, but through rebuilding a world where no one has to bleed just to be seen. So this aspect doesn't excuse, it exposes. Sun opposite Chiron shows us what happens when unprocessed trauma meets unchecked power. So the lesson here for all of us is about how we address pain. Do we transform it or do we let it consume us? The Sun opposite Chiron is not an easy road. It's a wound that demands visibility while punishing exposure. A deep ache to be seen as whole in a world that profits from our fractures. So, in the most extreme cases, the pain can become louder than the person. But the aspect, he isn't here to doom anyone. It's actually here to reveal, to ask hard questions about what happens when identity and injury collide. What happens when the system that's supposed to protect becomes the source of harm? And what might healing look like, not just for the individual, but for a world that's stitched together by trauma and silence and power? If Chiron teaches us anything, it's that pain doesn't just break us, it initiates us. The real revolution begins not in retaliation, but in reckoning. Now let's look at another case study, Jane Fonda, who is a striking embodiment of the Sun in Sagittarius, opposite Chiron in Gemini, a living myth of wisdom, hard-earned through wounding, and a public voice that's shaped by personal fracture. With her Sun in Sagittarius, Jane's essential identity orients towards truth-seeking and activism, a bold philosophical vision. Sagittarius suns are built for wide-angle thinking, moral conviction, and calling things by their true names. Gemini wounds, they often center around fragmentation, saying one thing and being seen as another, or holding two selves that can't quite reconcile. So for Jane, that manifested in the intense public backlash which she received for speaking out against the Vietnam War. She was called a traitor. She was villainized by the media and silenced in some circles despite feeling like she was standing in the Sagittarian truth. So that's a real classic Sun-Chiron opposition territory. Her solar purpose demanded that she speak out, while Chiron whispered, they'll misunderstand you, they'll punish you for your words. And yet, she kept speaking. And that's the turning point for this aspect. The wound didn't silence her permanently. It deepened her commitment. She became more nuanced, more intentional, more aware of how her words land. She turned towards healing by owning her contradictions and embracing her need to keep growing and evolving and apologizing where needed. Even in her late life work, like Grace and Frankie, it shows a kind of healed Gemini, playing with dual roles, humor, dialogue, and collaboration, and a fully claimed Sagittarius sun, willing to show up unapologetically as an elder and an activist and a truth teller. Jane Fonda teaches us that with the Sun opposite Chiron, the wound may always echo, but that doesn't have to define you. Instead, it can become your compass. It can guide you to live in greater integrity with your truth, even when your voice shakes. So, if you have the Sun opposite Chiron in your natal chart, it's not your downfall. It's actually your invitation. It is the part of you that keeps rising, even when the world misunderstands you. It is the brilliance that refuses to dim just because, hurt can't be seen. There's a wound there, but it's also fire. And every time that you choose to show up and to speak and to create and to love anyway, you're alchemizing that pain into purpose. You're putting out the flames within you. And that's the power of this aspect. It really teaches you how to lead not in spite of your wound, but because you've actually dared to live through it. So if the sign opposite Chiron feels like a place that you'll never quite get right, remember, this isn't about perfection. It's about courage. You don't have to be fully healed in order to shine. You just have to stop hiding the parts of you that still tremble. Because those parts, they're sacred. They're strong. And when you let your light come through the cracks, that's when you actually become unstoppable. So, like Robin Hood, you might have been exiled from ease or misunderstood for your mission, but that doesn't make you wrong. It makes you real. In one telling of the book Robin Hood, Robin says, "Rise and rise again until lambs become lions." And that's the real heart of this aspect. You rise, not because you're unscarred, but because you've made peace with the scar and you've chosen to lead anyway. You don't need to be healed to be heroic. You just need to keep rising.